And it takes the bigger person to say, we're not gonna fight back, we're gonna forgive. In life, let me tell you a secret. It's so much better when you're not walking around with bitterness. You know what Nelson Mandela said? To not forgive is like drinking poison yourself and then waiting for your enemy to drop down dead. So imagine if I'm mad at you and I'm like, you're such an idiot, and I drink poison, and I'm like waiting for you to drop down dead, but the poison is killing me. That's what unforgiveness is. When you choose to forgive, it will give you more hope. Let's look at what Jesus says about forgiving. Matthew 18, verse 21, Jesus puts the stud back in Bible stud E. And we're gonna put the dying back in stud dying. Sometimes studying isn't easy. Paul said study to the point of exhaustion. That's what he told Timothy. That's why the word dying is in studying. Sometimes that's how it feels. So we're gonna study this passage. By the way, is anyone here for the first time? Raise your hand if you're here for the first time. It's so good to see you all. I'm so glad you're here studying with us for the first time. Now we'd love for you to come up and sing us a song. Joking. Oh, I love how you were actually gonna do it. That's courage. Anyways, we hope you feel loved. Matthew 18, 21 and 22, look at what this says. Then Peter came to him and said, Lord, how often shall my brother sin against me and I forgive him? Up to 7 times? Jesus said to him, verse 22, I do not say to you up to 7 times, but up to 70 times 7. Now, remember, if you take a text out of its context, you're only left with a con rather than a pro. If you take the text out of context, you get a con rather than a pro, and it is a con artist stealing your joy. Now, the context of this passage is the Jewish rabbis, remember Jesus and Peter were Jewish, and they taught that you were not supposed to forgive more than 3 times. Why? Because in the opening chapters of the book of Amos, there's various condemnations on the nations for 3 transgressions and for 4. So for 3 transgressions and for 4, I will punish Damascus and Gaza and Tyre and Edom and Ammon and Moab. Those are the first 3 chapters of the book of Amos. For 3 transgressions and for 4, I will punish you. That was Jewish theology. They said if God forgives 3 times but punishes on the 4th transgression, we are not supposed to forgive more than 3 times. So what does Peter do? Peter knows Jesus is really nice. So he says, okay, Jesus, I'm gonna be really gracious here. How many times should I forgive someone I don't agree with? How many times should I forgive somebody who injures me? How many times should I forgive somebody who wrongs me? How many times should I forgive? 7? And with eager self-satisfaction, no doubt Peter is expecting to be patted on the back. Because he takes the rabbinic 3, multiplies it by 2, for good measure adds 1, and with eager self-satisfaction, he's like, yeah, I should forgive 7 times, right, Lord? And he's expecting applause, no doubt. But Jesus says, no, Peter, 70 times 7. That's how much I want you to forgive, 70 times 7. That's what Paul was getting at when he said in 1 Corinthians 13, love keeps no record of wrongs. The quickest way to be miserable is to keep a running tally of the wrongs that were done to you. By the way, that phrase, love keeps no record of wrongs, in 1 Corinthians 13, in Greek is the word logos esthai. And it was actually an accountant's, a banker's term, and it meant literally to store up items in a ledger. Have you ever met somebody who's so good at keeping track of the wrongs that were done to him, the wrongs that were done to her, that they're as scrupulous as an accountant? Just like taking track, keeping track, taking note of every wrong ever done. The Bible says, don't do that. Love does not logos esthai. It does not keep up a ledger of wrongs received. It does not remember the ills that were done. Love believes all things. Love keeps no record of wrongs. Get rid of the ledger. The quickest way to be miserable is to keep a running tally of wrongs that were done to you, wrongs that were done to me. By the way, what do you call an apology when somebody wrongs you? What do you call an apology written in dots and dashes? Remorse code. Now, listen. When I'm talking about forgiveness, I'm not saying be a wuss or a wimp, as they would say when I was a kid. In fact, this is crazy. Jesus said, if somebody slaps you on the right cheek, turn your other to him also. If you were to slap someone on their right cheek, and most people are right-handed, it'd be really awkward. So what he's talking about is a backhand slap, obviously. And a backhand slap in Jewish culture was twice as insulting as hitting with the front of the hand. A backhand slap was in the Jewish hierarchy saying, you are a lower caste than me, so you'd backhand somebody. But then if you turn your other cheek, you're saying, now you have to hit me as an equal. Listen to this. It's true. In the hierarchy, if you hit the other cheek, you're getting hit as an equal. Listen to this. Jesus said, if somebody takes your garment, I was just studying this week. If somebody takes your cloak, give him your tunic too. Well, that was the clothing that Jews wore, a garment and a tunic. So if you gave your garment and then you gave your tunic too, you were like stripping down in front of the guy. So as you're like stripping down, dun, 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 suddenly your oppressor is gonna wanna stop you. Why? Because in that culture, nakedness was not so much a shame on you. If you were naked, that wasn't a shame on you as much as a shame on the one who observed your nakedness. That's why Genesis, remember, Noah was ticked at Ham, and he cursed Ham when he hammed it up and said, hey, brothers, look at my dad's nakedness. Who was cursed? Was it Noah or Ham? It was Ham who was cursed for observing the nakedness. So Jews didn't want to be cursed. So they didn't want to behold your nakedness. So when you were giving your tunic too, they might want to think about it. Okay, wait a second. I don't want to observe your nakedness lest I'm cursed. Listen to this. Whoever demands you to go 1 mile, go with him 2. Always go the extra mile. It's never crowded. When Jesus said that, he was speaking to his Jewish culture. Now, remember, the Jews were an occupied peoples. Israel was inhabited by the Roman military. And Roman law, Roman law said, that if you demanded a Jew, a subject, to carry your baggage 1 mile, he was forced to do it, but he could not carry the baggage 2 miles. They weren't wanting to be cruel to their subjects, so they said, you can carry my baggage, a Roman soldier could say. This was Roman military law back in the 1st century. You can carry my baggage for 1 mile. Now, that was very degrading because you're treating a Jew like a mule. You're saying, carry my luggage. We don't have cars, so carry my luggage like a mule, like a pack animal. That was very degrading. But if you said, sir, let me go with you 2 miles, suddenly the Roman soldier would be like, oh, wait a second, I don't want to be seen going with you 2 miles. It's against the law. So the cool thing about that context of turning the other cheek, saying, hit me as an equal, stripping down to give the tunic, do you want to observe my nakedness? Go 2 miles? Are you sure you want to break the law and be seen doing this? Because that was a public thing. The interesting thing is, Jesus was teaching that there is such a thing as dignified love. In other words, love is not just being a doormat. That's not going to work well for you. People can't make you feel inferior without your consent. Like, you can just let people walk over you all the time, but that's not going to go very well. There's a third way. Some people think it's all about aggression. Other people think it's all about being passive and weak. But Jesus taught third way wisdom. Jesus was so wise. He's like, there's a better way to live. You can live with a dignified love. Mahatma Gandhi actually took these teachings to heart. He called it soul power. When he actually went on the Salt March and disobeyed the English and turned the other cheek, and they sailed away in their ships because they were tired of oppressing Indians who wouldn't fight back. And yet Gandhi was always like trying to be dignified. Same with Martin Luther King Jr. He stood up for his people, but he did it in a loving way. They called it nonviolent civil disobedience, and they got that teaching from Jesus. And I think that's the way to live. It doesn't mean you're walked on by people. I've seen people who just get walked on, nor does it mean you're always bitter. I've seen people who are bitter, and I've gone both directions. But the truth is, the Lord has called us to third way wisdom, to turning the other cheek, going the extra mile, giving the tunic too. It's third way wisdom, and then you give your oppressor, listen, this is the key, you give your oppressor a chance to be remorseful. You give your oppressor a chance to be better. So it's not just about how awesomely forgiving you are, you're giving him a chance to be better too. You're giving them a chance to say, do you really want to go 2 miles? Do you really want my tunic too? Do you really want to strike me as an equal? And you're then making the other person better That's what it's about. How cool is that? Is that thirdwaybomb.com or what? I'm just so pumped about learning this. And then I love this. Jesus goes on to threaten people into forgiveness. Look at what he goes on to say. I'll just sum it up for lack of time. But listen, Jesus right after this tells a parable of a guy who owes his master 10,000 talents. The master forgives him, and then the guy goes and finds his fellow servant who owes him 100 denarii, and he won't forgive him. He grabs him by the cloak at the throat. This was called apagogi in Greek law. He grabbed him by the coat at the throat, threw him into prison, and the overlord, I love saying overlord, heard about this, and he says, didn't I just forgive you 10,000 talents? Why then are you not forgiving your fellow servant 100 denarii? You threw him in prison after I forgave you 10,000 talents. You threw in prison a guy who owes you 100 denarii. Because of this, I'm going to throw you into prison. You're going to be tortured until you pay every last cent. Jesus went on to say, so too the Heavenly Father will do to you if from your heart you do not forgive your brother. Now, Jesus is so nice that he threatens people into forgiveness. Forgive, Jesus is saying. It's like he's putting the fear of God in people to say, forgive. To forgive is to set a prisoner free. Then to discover that the prisoner was you. The real guy who was in prison was not the guy who owed 100 denarii who he threw into the dungeon. The real guy who was in prison was the guy who threw the man in the dungeon, and he walked around seemingly in liberty, but then he ended up going to the torturers. To forgive is to set a prisoner free, then to discover the prisoner was you. Nelson Mandela, one of the greatest political figures when it came to love. I mean, he was jailed wrongly for 27 years? And all of his buddies wanted to go against the whites because he was suffering unjustly due to apartheid in South Africa. And when he gets out of prison, many of the blacks said, let's fight against the whites. It's an us and them mentality. And Nelson Mandela's like, nope, we are going to be unified as a country. And he truly changed the world. And it takes the bigger person to say, we're not gonna fight back, we're gonna forgive. And life, let me tell you a secret, it's so much better when you're not walking around with bitterness. You know what Nelson Mandela said? To not forgive is like drinking poison yourself and then waiting for your enemy to drop down dead. So imagine if I'm mad at you and I'm like, you're such an idiot, and I drink poison, and I'm like waiting for you to drop down dead, but the poison is killing me. That's what unforgiveness is. When you choose to forgive, it will give you more hope. When you give hope to people, you watch what you reap, you will sow. I'm finding that more and more. When I give hope to people, they want to give hope to me. Jesus said, when you show mercy, you will receive mercy. Now, listen, follow me, this is crazy. When Jesus said, the man owed 10,000 talents, was forgiven, but he wouldn't forgive the guy who had 100 denarii that he owed this man. And so the overlord threw the once forgiven man into prison. This is the crazy thing. That was the most absurd parable. Jesus was using absurdity to fortify and buttress his point. Like, we don't always understand how funny Jesus was. Kids love to be around him for a reason. He was anointed with the oil of gladness, but we don't always get that in our culture. Like, for example, when he said, why do you judge the speck in somebody else's eye if you have a log hanging out of your eye? Like, he was using ancient humor. In this occasion, it's a humorous story, and I'll tell you why. Talents in denarii were monetary units in the ancient world. So we don't really understand that when we read it. Let me give you context. A denarius was 1 day's wage. The guy owed 100 denarii. A talent was 15 years' wages. The guy owed 10,000 talents. Let me break it down in a picture for you, because I'm a visual learner. Listen. If you were to break down this coinage into small change, this gets nuts. Are you ready to? If you were to break down the 100 denarii debt and the 10,000 talent debt into small change, you could fit the 100 denarii in one pocket. Ever heard the phrase pocket change? Small change? If you were to break down the 100 denarii into small change, you could fit it into one pocket. R.A. Kennedy did the math. He'd crunch the numbers. If you were to break down the 10,000 talent debt that the guy was forgiven into small change, it would require an army of 8,600 men, each carrying a 60-pound sack worth of coins. And if they were spread apart by 1 yard, they would form a line 5 miles long. So when Jesus' listeners are hearing this, they're like chuckling to themselves. Because, listen, this guy owed a debt that would take 8,600 men, each carrying a 60-pound sack, forming a line 5 miles long. That's how much he was forgiven. And he wouldn't forgive pocket change? And what's Jesus' point? He who is forgiven much loves much. When I think of the fact that every wrong thought I've ever had, every word of gossip I've ever spoke, every complaint I've ever made, every bad thing I've ever done, every slight injustice I've ever committed, every errant thought I've ever committed, every idle word I've ever spoken since I was in my mother's womb, every thought that was in my brain, if God forgives every wrong thing I have ever done, that's a big debt to forgive. So whatever anyone else does to me is pocket change in comparison. And Jesus is saying, I know it hurts. 100 denarii was still 100 days' wages. That's like roughly a third or a quarter of your year's salary. That's still solid. But it is pocket change in comparison. Do you see? To how much the debt is that God forgave you and God forgave me. Ben Courson here. Thank you so much for watching my new YouTube channel. Make sure to smash that like and subscribe button, share this video with all your friends, and hit that bell so you're notified every time a new video comes out. May the hope be with you.